Hi everybody, welcome to a new edition of Cellar Talks, and today we'll be talking with James Flewellen, who created something really cool, a study tool called Wine Maps, and I'll be inviting James in just a minute, so stay tuned and let's see what we can learn from James about wine study today. See some people already tuning in, so welcome everybody who's watching for the first time and also people that watched previous episodes. Today we're in episode number 3, so we've got 3 more planned for the first season. And let me see if James is ready to join us. Just 1 second. I hope everybody's doing well. Maybe you're already drinking a glass of wine, so if you're drinking something, please share. I'm curious to see what you're drinking. For me, it's today the Riesling from Wittmann, the one I posted about the other day. So it's a great Premier Cru, first Erste Lage from Wittmann, a nice Riesling wine. So still some left in the bottle, so that's for today. And James, I'm not sure about James, what he's doing, if he's drinking something, but if you guys are enjoying a glass of wine, do let me know. In the meanwhile, there is in the bottom of the screen a question mark box. Should you have any questions during the show, feel free to click on the box and you can drop your questions there. It's a little easier because normally in the chat they get lost and I can't find the questions back. So use the question mark in the bottom of the application, and there you can drop your questions. Just 1 more second before James will be joining us. In the meanwhile, I can tell you a little bit about the guest for next week, and that will be Elisabeth Mutz from Weingut Rappenhof in Germany. So we're going to talk about nice Riesling wines from Rheinhessen. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And after that, we have only 2 more episodes left, but we're already working on and planning on creating a second season. So already invited some guests for that. I see somebody is drinking a Verdejo. Really nice. So you're in the same flavor range as I am with the Riesling. Actually, don't know the producer, but Verdejo, well, in my book, it's always a good thing. James, where are you? See, he's online, so just waiting for him to accept the invitation. And somebody's drinking a Mencia Wine Adventures NL. Wow, that's interesting. Wish I could see that. I don't know actually about talking about wine study. Who of you is actually doing study at the moment? So maybe WSAT or has done WSAT in the past, because what we will be talking about today also is about the syllabus for WSAT. So if you're planning on doing a WSAT course or are in the middle of one, that would be very interesting for you guys as well. And I see more people with a Verdejo, so that's really good. Verdejo is in favor at the moment. And now let's see why James is still not there. And meanwhile, I will send him a text. So, did I miss anything? Somebody else drinking more Verdejo? No, no more Verdejos at the moment. Oh, S01E03. Well, that's a nice equivalence. Also quite knowledgeable there. And James is watching. So now the question is, can James join us? He can. So let's see if the connection is going to help us out here. He probably just finished his dinner in the UK. Ah, one more Verdejo from Rueda.
Oh, great, that's worked.
James.
Hello, hello. I don't know why it's
now I can
working
see you.
before, but good, here we are.
Very good. Welcome.
Thank you.
How's things in the UK besides Corona? Because we can talk a lot about that, but
We can also talk about the cold grey weather and the lack of daylight and sunshine, and I'm finding it extremely difficult to have conversations with my family who are all in very sunny, warm New Zealand, where it's yeah, that's just a bit tough. But you know,
that's about your
survival.
origin. We're going to talk about that as well, New Zealand, right?
Indeed, yeah, exactly, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, welcome. It's good to have you in the show. I was just explaining to the audience. We've got some people that are watching for the second or the third time, but we'll also see some new people in. I was just polling a little bit what we're drinking. Mostly it's Verdejo. So I don't know if you already opened up a bottle, but if you didn't, then Verdejo, if you want to be in favor, then it's the way to go at the moment.
Well, that's pretty good. Yeah, I don't have a Verdejo, but I do have a couple of light, fruity, zippy white wines. So
Okay.
they're very applicable. A Muscadet from France,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, and I had a delicious dry Tokai last night, so I've got a little bit of that
Good.
to
I
soak
know
in.
you're always experimenting quite a lot. I mean, sometimes I see the posts coming by, but you don't stick to one particular kind of wine. So I know that you're really keen on trying new stuff. So I don't
Yes.
expect too much. I expect you to go off the beaten path every
Yeah.
now and then.
Yeah.
Good. Well,
Absolutely.
once again, I just explained to the audience there's a question box in the bottom, so if they have questions, they can put them in there. People are already putting some remarks and questions in the chat, but it's difficult for us to keep up with them. So let's use the question box for that. Maybe we start a little bit with an introduction from your side. So where you come from, how did you get into wine, and yeah, well, there's enough interesting stuff for you to talk about. So let's start with that first, maybe, and I'll take a sip of my Riesling in this case.
Lovely. Um, yes, so I am a New Zealander. Grew up in Christchurch, New Zealand, in the South Island. There, moved to the UK just over 10 years ago for graduate studies. And that was really when I got into wine. So, yeah, growing up in New Zealand is known, I think, reasonably worldwide now as a good winemaking country. But when I was growing up, it was not didn't have the same reputation or the same kind of wine didn't have the same social standing. I think nowadays you go to New Zealand and everybody pretty much will drink wine. It's a normal thing.
Mm-hmm.
But no, as a in my background in my childhood, I didn't, my parents started getting into wine just when I was maybe just younger than a teenager, so not quite, it wasn't like a cultural childhood sort of thing. So it wasn't really until I came to the UK actually that I started to get interested in wine and wine tasting. I joined a wine tasting club at university, which is how I learned the practice of wine tasting. The wine tasting club focused entirely on blind tasting and actually doing this competitively. So my kind of introduction to wine was maybe not the usual introduction, but it was certainly became a very thorough analytical introduction, and it was a good grounding.
Yes, and then you've attended Oxford, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about that, because when we did the pre-talk, we talked about there's obviously always the rivalry between Oxford and Cambridge, and to my surprise, there is even now a rivalry. I don't know if you're still there. Did you catch the question?
Yeah, I just missed the last bit. The
Okay.
rivalry, yeah,
How,
between
how did you get involved in that, in the tasting competition? Because that's an interesting story, I think.
yeah, it is. So yes, I went to Oxford University to do a PhD, and the university has all these clubs, all of these, societies. You can play football, you can play chess, you can do fencing, you can do horse riding, you can do I don't know, graffiti art, all sorts of things you can do. And the university had not one but three wine tasting clubs, at least three that I knew about. There's probably a million secret societies that I was never cool
Mm-hmm.
enough to get an invite to, but there are three that I were aware of. And I learned in retrospect that you could break these three clubs up into uh, the drinking society, the socializing society, and the society where you actually go to learn about wine. And I didn't really know this at the start, but I went for the society with the cheapest membership. And
Mm-hmm.
that so happened to be the one with all the wine geeks in it. And so that's how I got into, the wine tasting thing. And then I turn up to this the first tasting, and it's in this it's not at all this like fairy tale Oxford room or whatever. It's like this brutalist 1960s building, and it's like winter and it's cold, and it's like go up this like staircase and you get lost because you don't know which door you go in. Finally get in there, and there's this room with, I don't know, there was like about 20 or so of us there, so it wasn't an enormous number of people. Everyone's sitting in silence around this table, not really knowing what's going on. I sit down, and then a few minutes later, someone else comes in and sits down next to me. And I recognize this guy because if you're a New Zealander, anyone would recognize the captain or the most recent captain of your national rugby team.
Mm-hmm.
And so it so happened that this guy was doing a degree at Oxford. He had just retired from professional rugby, and he comes in and just sits down right beside me. And that was, completely unexpected. And so then the rest of the night goes on, and then we learn that the wines that were being served are blind, as in we don't know what's in the glass, etc. And the first couple of wines that they're served in pairs. One of the wines there, I smell. I look at my colleague to my side, the All Blacks captain, who has also
Mm-hmm.
done the same thing. We both look at each other, and we both are thinking the same thing, and virtually say it at the same thing. Like, I think this is a New Zealand Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc.
Because
And
this
so
one, obviously, you had before.
exactly, and this is the one that both of us, the two Kiwis in the room, just could nail this based on smelling it. And it's obviously a very charismatic,
Mm-hmm.
characterful wine, and it has a very distinct aroma. And so that was my kind of first wine tasting, first blind tasting, which was with the seated next to the All Blacks captain, a very famous celebrity in New Zealand. Um, Tasting these different wines in this very eccentric environment, and yeah, so I thought this is kind of fun, and kept going back to these tastings, and then learned about the principles of smelling the wine and tasting the wine and analyzing the wine and trying to identify the wine based on what you can smell without knowing what the bottle is beforehand.
Yeah.
And then a couple of months later, I was taken aside by the leader of the club, who says, well, you do know that we do this competitively, don't you? And I'm like, no.
You're asking me.
And then, yeah, exactly. Then and then he said, well, we want you to be in the team or to try out for the team. And so that was a little bit daunting. I think the first time I actually set foot in a library in Oxford was to try to memorize a lot of wine information, to prepare for this competition that you alluded to, Niels. This famous Oxford-Cambridge
Yeah.
rivalry, which is not just football, it's not just cricket, it's not just rowing, it's also competitive blind tasting. Um, and so that involved, training. We were training on average sort of 3 times a week, but in the kind of a couple of weeks before this big competition, it was almost
Hmm.
every day. And there was a team of 7 of us, and on the morning, freezing morning in the middle of winter, we took the train to London and met at the venue there and had our competitive wine tasting with our arch rivals at Cambridge University. Um, so that
And
was,
how did it end? Should we ask or?
well, it was a mixed result.
Hmm.
We lost, my team, Oxford team, lost that year, but the kind of the silver lining was that I was awarded the highest prize for the best tasting score,
Individual taster.
the best individual tasting score.
Hmm.
Yeah, so there was a kind of a mixed blessing there. That was quite nice to win that, completely to my surprise, and it was a really good incentive for me to continue doing this.
It sort of brought you on the fast track for
Mm,
wine study and developing your knowledge about wine. I think maybe.
yeah, definitely. It was definitely a real kind of kickstart, like to learn a lot about wine, quite a concentrated period of time, and yeah, absolutely, it was an amazing kickstart. It's what I think's really really nice to do is if you can taste wine in a group of people,
Hmm.
you can learn so much more quickly.
Yeah.
And these days, this group of people is arguably easier to find with
Hmm.
online
Yeah.
conversations, but that university setting really uh, had that ability to find a kind of a network of people to taste wine with.
Oh, it's absolutely true because if you, I mean, you can only taste so much as an individual, but you learn from what everybody else is bringing to the table when it comes down to knowledge, and every person has different developed senses, so also this is different, obviously. Um, so then you got sort of more hooked on wine, and you went into going into WSAT,
Yep.
and now you're a finished and a graduated diploma course, well, not student, alumni, I would say
Yep.
then. So can you tell us how that went? So you went into WSAT, and what was your goal or your idea behind that to go on with the study?
So exactly, so kind of beginning this having a very good grounding in wine tasting with the wine tasting club and doing the blind tasting, and then translating that into a formal qualification. So I went through the WSET, completed my diploma, and the the piece of advice I'd have is don't finish your diploma when you're finishing a PhD thesis at the same time.
As it
That's
was not easy enough to do the PhD, you
that's
wanted
not.
to do diploma course as well.
Yeah, exactly. I postponed the final exam of the diploma in order to finish my thesis. So
Oh,
that
not
was
the PhD.
no. A PhD was my ticket for my visa, so I needed to I
Okay,
needed to finish that
fair
on time.
enough.
So so I completed the diploma, and the process of doing the diploma, it made me aware that there wasn't quite the same. Well, there was certainly a gap in the market, I felt, for an avenue of wine education, of communicating certain elements of
Hmm.
wine education in a different way. There's plenty of wine education resources out there, of course there are, but there were some things that I found myself kind of rewriting or relearning or synthesizing the material from the huge array of authoritative materials that are out there into something that made sense to me. And initially this was in a written book. So I co-authored a book on wine and blind tasting, which came out of the WSET experience. And then more recently, that's could have taken some different paths as well with the wine guides, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a bit.
Yeah, that's what we're going to go talk about.
Yeah, so that was the WSET.
But you're also teaching at the moment. I don't know if you're at the moment doing classes, but you have to teach the WSAT. So you've always, I mean, you had your own experience about how difficult it is to memorize all this information, etc. But you also see students struggling with this topic. It's something that comes up every now and then with persons that study in WSAT or any other course.
Exactly. Yeah, I think having the exposure to seeing people in wine tastings, to going through these courses, these classes. And yeah, you're absolutely right. There are certain things in common which people, students, kind of find difficult to absorb because there's a vast amount of material in these WSET
Yeah,
courses.
I agree. Yeah.
And they're quite academic heavy, so to speak. They're quite book intensive. There's lots of reading material and all that sort of thing. And not everyone sort of learns that effectively with that method. And I know I certainly learn in quite different ways. So I think that method really, sort of different exposure to different learning styles and different teaching styles. And I've done quite a lot of science and mathematics teaching as well, and sort of teaching of abstract concepts, but in more concrete ways, is that's really helped me, I feel, as an educator and as a communicator of wine.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to pause here for 1 second because I need to get the images in. I want to show the audience a little bit about the wine maps, which we're going to talk about. So I just hold here for 1 second. Now we're back. Because we're going to talk today about the wine maps that you created, and you already explained a little bit how that came to birth, this idea. So it's the complexity of the content with WSET in mind, but it goes the same with other wine courses, because we're talking now in this case particularly about old world knowledge for wine, and France in particular for this case. So there's so many wines, appellations, regions, terroir differences, that it's difficult to keep track of that. So then you decided to take your knowledge about learning and the skills that you have on that level and combine it with the theoretical approach that WSET offers. Nothing wrong with that, but if you open up the book, especially if you go in WSAT 3, I mean, yeah, a lot of people say, okay, I've opened it and I put it away after reading a couple of pages, but you need to get through the content. So then you figured there must be a different way to present this content. So what we see here on the screen is a snippet of one of the sides of the map. So maybe you can explain a little bit how the maps are built up, and for which regions you decided to go for first, and what the idea was to offer an additional learning experience besides the books.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I created a set of wine guides. They are infographic wine maps, I guess is probably the best way of describing them. And the idea, so they cover France, they cover the syllabus for both the WSET, say level 2, level 3, and this is kind of at a more introductory level. And then I did a second set, which is what Niels is showing now, an example of one of those, and that's more for the diploma level. And I think there's other applications too. There's different different markets, different courses, etc. I think people will get a lot out of it in different ways. And the idea behind them is to have a summary of the relevant things you need to know. And we're looking at the Burgundy guides that I developed. And this has a written summary of the geographical context, as well as the major grapes and the climate and things like that. And then there's some interesting facts and figures, which I think puts Burgundy, in this example, into context with other wine regions in France and elsewhere. And then we have a stylized map, which is what we're seeing on the screen now.
You want me to switch to a bigger? I have a bigger picture like this
Yeah,
one, for example.
that one's great. Yeah,
Yeah.
either of these. So it's so as you can see with that, it's not a cartographically precise map, because I found in my, the World Atlas of Wine is an amazing document, but there's so much information there, contour lines and these other villages and these little tiny ponds and lakes and all
Hmm.
sorts of things, which doesn't necessarily aid you in the overall grand picture of what you're trying to learn. So
Yeah.
I tried to simplify, distill this information into a more stylized infographic form. And these the boxes have the useful information for each region, like a pie chart which breaks down your red production, your white production, your rosé, etc. The major grape varieties, a little summary of the terroir, the area, the volumes, things like that. So that's the idea. The sizing of each of these regions, the kind of the colored boxes, they approximately represent the amount of wine. Like you see the green one, the Macon, is big because not just
Yeah.
because it's a big region, but it produces the most volume of wine in Burgundy. So there's
So
a
it
lot
puts
of,
it already in perspective if you look at sizes and yeah, like you said, it's not meant to be cartographically 100% correct, but it's more for an easy understanding, and then you have to sometimes exaggerate a little bit to make it more
yeah,
clear.
exactly. Yeah. Exactly so. And I've got quite an interest in graphic design and map making as well. And the idea of displaying something, a lot of information, data visually, some complex information, but as simply as is possible, and making something very data rich but clear was the goal of
Yeah.
these wine guides.
So and then you have two sets that you created. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about the differences between the two, because I'm
Yeah.
using the pictures for the audience. The pictures are made from both sets, so there is a difference between the two sets. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, exactly. So I did two sets. One of my kind of design philosophies is that you present the relevant information, but you don't over present. You don't present too much information, because then that becomes overwhelming. So I feel that if you are just beginning your journey into wine, serious wine study, which is kind of WSET level 2 to level
Yeah.
3, and similar courses, French wine scholar and other similar approaches, then you don't want all of this information about all of these very data heavy things. So the first set I developed is a so-called introductory guide, and there's a set of 5 guides in this set, and it covers all of France, but not in the same amount of detail. So there's Burgundy and Beaujolais, Bordeaux, Southwest, the Loire, the Rhone. The south of France doesn't have as much information on it, because that's not a big part of the syllabus, Provence and other and Languedoc appellations. But overall, with these
But it
5
should be
guides,
enough to get you through until level 3. So basically, if you're using the maps, you're not missing out on anything. And yeah, what you need is in there. That's what's the
ex
story.
exactly, yes, there's everything you need and nothing you don't need
Yeah,
in these set of 5 guides
because
up
that's in
to.
the book. What you don't need.
Exactly. Yeah, that's kind of, you've cleared that out.
Yeah.
And that's the level 3. And then beyond that, there's a series of 11 guides actually, which covers in a lot more detail the appellations, the whole regions of France. So it includes some lesser known regions. There's a whole guide dedicated to Provence, to Eastern France, to, you know, the Jura, Savoie, obviously Alsace. And these guides go into more detail. They include more appellations. There's a bit more kind of technical information about the volumes of wine produced in each appellation. And yeah, just overall a bit more detail. There's more kind of comparative graphics, like the pie charts that tell you the proportion of Merlot grown in Bordeaux, for instance. It's sort of, when you're getting to your diploma level, that's the sort of information that is really necessary for you to get this deep understanding. But I tried to present it in a very clear way.
Oh, I think that the nice thing is that you don't only talk the talk, you walk the walk, and you did it yourself because you finished a diploma course, so you went through that level. You're still doing the teaching, so you get feedback still every day when you're communicating with other people. And now people are using your maps, so you get feedback from those people as well. So what is the, let's say, when you first came out with the maps, what was the, let's say, the feedback that you got most, what you were thinking, like, okay, I had an idea when I started this, but this was not what I had in mind, or this is a surprise that came out that I didn't think about when I started the idea.
Yeah, so it's a really good question, and these maps have kind of been in my head for probably 2 years or so, and then I launched them towards the end of last year, in September, and I think overall they've been really positively received, which has been really, really wonderful to get feedback from people saying, I really appreciate this, and these have been very useful for my wine studies, and they're great gifts for my relative or friend or somebody who's really into wine, and that's been really nice. The one thing, there's two things. I initially conceived of these as posters, so quite large format posters, and all of my artwork and design I still have, and I'm still trying to think of the best way of maybe presenting the information as large posters. So that's something I'm still working on.
Still optional, yeah.
Still optional. But I couldn't find a good printer at the time that could deliver economically the large scale posters. So I pivoted to the format which you see, which actually I can show you.
You've got them at hand, right? So you can, because now I'm showing snippets, but it's better to see the real.
Yeah. So you can see the kind of, it's the piece of paper here. This is the Bordeaux one we see. Then there's the back, and you can open it up. And in this case,
now we see the nice maps.
Yeah, so it's a nice kind of three folded thing. There's a little. This one is a little zoom in of the Médoc area. So the idea with these is that it's kind of, you can put it in your laptop bag or your handbag or your.
If you have some spare time, you just take it out and you can just start going through it, fresh up your memory on certain topics.
Exactly. Yeah, you can take it out. You can, when we don't have a lockdown or a pandemic, you can go to a wine bar and take your guide out and sit with your glass of wine and enjoy that. But it is an analog tactile thing, which I'm really drawn to things which are paper, because that's how typically I tend to learn. I don't like, so much screen time all the time. But one of the things that did go through my head is would this be better as a some kind of digital format? Yet I think I've had exactly 2 people request it as a digital format so far. So that was kind of interesting. The absence of that feedback, I suppose, did tell me that I think there is a sort of a market for this analog tactile thing you hold in your hand, and you have your glass of wine with it. You can, you have your notebook with it. You write your notes as well. That was so that was kind of good. And otherwise,
I agree, and especially because they're so compact, then it makes it easy. There is no objections to keep them with you or put them somewhere where they're at hand. So when it's digital, okay, you have to browse and through your documents, try to find them again, and it's nice. It's not a big book you need to carry around. So in that sense, it's totally understandable. So and then you started with France, obviously, because well, I know because I did WSAT 2 going into 3 that it's a lot about France,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah.
But what are the next steps? You're already thinking about IDs for other countries or a request that you got in? I have a request, but we'll talk about that later.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So that it's been really, really humbling to receive such great feedback from everyone who's received these guides so far. That's been really, really nice. And then probably the most most frequent feedback I get is which region are you going to do
Yeah.
next? So that's which is really, really, really
If
wonderful
you're
to
gonna
hear
do one, maybe you're gonna stop after this
everyone.
success.
But yes, but no, you're
When is
right.
Italy coming? I already see one.
Yeah.
Maybe you got that. Maybe you got that and more. It's a difficult country. Let's put it like that.
Oh my goodness, yes. I would I chose France because as you say, the WSET is 50% France
Yeah.
almost. Um and you know for good reason and great. That's nice and I've really enjoyed going into the detail there. Um but yes, I would love to do some more regions, and I think they will be coming soon. I'm still having a think about which one to do next. And I see the comments about Italy coming being a challenge, and yeah, oh my goodness, it's a
If
little
you
bit
only talk about
intimidating.
the grapes, where I think we're talking, there's the book, 1001 Grapes from Italy. I don't think it covers all of them, but that's just one aspect of the whole story, obviously.
It's
Yeah.
one element. So the kind of my idea of taking complex information and presenting it in this sort of simplified
Yeah.
format will meet an even bigger challenge, I think,
Yeah.
with Italy. But yes, I would absolutely love to do some more, and I think my next release will be something fizzy,
Hmm.
so you can read into that what you want, and then beyond that, doing something a bit more in another country would be the goal. But I'm
Oh.
very much open to seeing what people would most like me to look at next. I mean, the WSET teaches you wine from all around the world, and I
Hmm.
have a strong interest in just global wine in general. So I'm not averse to tackling.
It would be nice with your background from New Zealand to also include New Zealand, obviously, and Australia, maybe. I mean,
Yeah,
there's to be honest, and this is where the question comes in that I got from our previous guest, Vanessa. I always ask our guests, "Do you have a question for the next show?" And she said, "Okay, I don't have a question, but I have a request. Can you think about? Would you like to think about different countries that are not so highlighted, because there's a lot of people obviously talking about, there's a good reason why you picked France, but there's also a lot of people talking about France.
yeah,
And if you would like to get some more detailed information, for example, about Rioja or Mendoza, that's really hard to come by. And well, her request was, would it intrigue you, and would it, like, let's say, be interesting for you to go a little bit in a different direction and do something like that?
yeah, definitely.
It
I'm
could be New
very
Zealand in that perspective as well.
Yeah, yes, it yeah, definitely could be. And I also am really drawn to countries and to regions which are sort of underrepresented in the global wine market. But even I think this was really interesting for me, even within France. And I think
Yeah,
my wine guides actually go beyond certainly the more complete series. They go beyond the WSET syllabus
I
actually.
agree. Yeah,
Um, because I included Corsica as an example, and
yeah,
the Jura, the Savoie, Bougie, quite a lot of appellations in Roussillon and Languedoc and the southwest of France, which are not very well known and they're not
no,
really covered. I love wines from the Loire Valley, and so often you just see a certain, you see a Sancerre, you see Touraine, you see a Muscadet, but you don't see Courchevelny too often. And so
yeah.
there's some of these are kind
There's
of,
still very much hidden gems still there for
yeah.
the larger audience at least, and not for the experts. But there's only a couple percent of those if you
Yeah.
want to talk about real experts. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I really enjoyed sort of finding these hidden gems within France, and some of that was extremely rewarding. And the yeah, but in terms of countries, I think
The
some
Netherlands is a good option, somebody said, but I'll give you a tip. If you want to think about the Netherlands, make it one with the UK included or England, because
yeah,
you cannot fill one with the south of England, and you can combine it with Holland. Then it will be one probably enough for one map.
great.
But we've
Just
got some new good wines coming up, but it's a fairly flat country, literally and figuratively as well. So
yeah.
yeah, maybe combine that one with England.
Sounds good.
What's your take? What's your take on English wine? Because I can ask you that. I know you also drink some fair amount of English wines as well every now and then.
Yeah, I do. I really like English wine, and I think it's going in a really exciting direction.
Hmm.
Um, Especially if you are in England, where, I mean, English wine is not cheap, even in England, but it's probably even more expensive on the export market. Um, so
It's a
it's
gimmick. It's a gimmick for a lot of countries outside of the other side of England. So you can pay more for that. Obviously, it's not a.
Yeah, it's kind of a novelty factor too.
Yeah.
But there is some extremely high quality English sparkling wine.
Hmm.
People kind of compare it to champagne. It's different to champagne overall. There's
Hmm.
the technique is the same, and there's a lot of, the grapes tend to be Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, sometimes Pinot Meunier as well. But there's some other things in common, maybe with German winemaking, German grapes, German hybrids, and German developed clones,
Hmm.
because the climate isn't too dissimilar from, parts of Germany, more northerly, central parts of Germany, and so there's the sparkling wine movement, but then there's some really interesting still wines, and actually
Hmm.
extremely high quality still wines coming out. And then there's the kind of hipster movement as well. And there's
The
some
orange wine and yeah.
orange wine, the Kfevri wine, the kind of, here's a strange variety that nobody makes, or some hybrid varieties which you can't do um, on continental Europe because they are sort of banned by the general EU framework for like
Well,
appellation.
in Holland you can. So I think if you dive into it, you see that we have, in that level, quite some similarities because there are also a lot
Mm,
of crosses in Holland. I mean, well, we don't have these regulations, we don't have appellations, we don't. I mean,
yeah,
you can pretty much do whatever you want here. So in that perspective, it's comparable, I guess.
yeah, yeah. No, that's interesting. Yeah, no, that's
And
really
I
good.
like, to be honest, I had only one English wine, a sparkling one, Night Timber, and I think it's really great. I mean, it's also internationally still quite well known and also drank in Holland in the better restaurants. And I think if I read up, it's getting better. Of course, there's the topic of climate changing and warming, so it will open up even more opportunities, as it's been proven to be in Germany, for example, as well. In some of the regions that had difficulties in the past, look at the Mosel, where they had in the 60s and 70s even years in a row that they couldn't get the grapes ripe, and now it's a
Mm.
matter of being too hot. So I think in the end, it's gonna help. But it's nice to see those developments as well. So yeah.
Yeah, it is, and I think you're right. Things will only improve. Not just the climate change, because I think even change is the operative
Hmm.
word. It might get a little bit warmer, but it'll get wetter, it'll get windier.
Yeah.
It won't be any easier to do viticulture, I don't
No.
think. It'll be
There's still a
kind of
lot of work, hard work, and that will never go away. That's
indeed. I see a comment. Is there an English wine I can recommend? Um, the my kind of more recent discovery has been a producer called Westwell, which is based in Kent, a small-ish production, beautiful, beautiful sparkling, traditional method sparkling, and they do a grape called Ortega, another German grape.
hmm.
And what I find really interesting is that you can get Ortega from them in, I think, three or four different styles. as in they make it a rosé with a bit of Pinot Noir to make it pink. They do a
Hmm.
straight Ortega. They do an Ortega skin contact, and then an Ortega aged in amphora. And it's just kind of really amazing what this example showed me is really amazing the different expressions you can get from one particular grape in one particular place. And so I thought in terms of innovation, that's
I mean,
making the most
that's
of
a
what you've got.
that's a good thing. I mean, and then you see that new world countries, if ever you can call it like that, so they have the freedom to experiment a little bit. We've even seen this in South Africa, which you cannot call new world really anymore, because already 100 years or more there is a good wine industry there. But it changed in the last 20, 25 years a lot, with people going abroad, studying, and also in Germany, for example, picking up those crosses. In Holland, the same thing happened. I think if you look at it, it's a good thing, because we don't need to. I mean, there's already enough really Chardonnay.
Yeah,
Let's try to go with something else, and also maybe also attract other people into drinking wine, because sometimes it's just about this flavor that you're missing, and well, some new varieties can add to that as well, at that perspective. Yeah.
definitely. Yeah, well, there's those 1001 plus varieties in
Yeah.
Italy that you mentioned before,
Yeah,
Neil.
well, they're even reviving all the old ones, and in Spain that's happening as well. I mean, we see
Mm,
some nice stories of grapes coming back to life there now as well, so that's really cool.
yeah.
Maybe one of the last questions I have is: do you have? Of course, you have, but what would be your advice for people going into WSAT, and that can be level 2, level 3. Let's say level 2 and level 3 for now, when they start studying.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. It's finding the way of learning that suits you. I feel as though the course
Mm-hmm.
is quite book heavy traditionally, but there are so many resources, whether it's kind of infographic wine maps, which is my thing. There's YouTube videos. There's other ways of
Instagram.
getting in it. There's Instagram. There's so much information out there. It's kind of finding what works for you and spending a bit of time to identify how your learning is. Dedicating some time. I think that's key. You need to be a little bit disciplined and saying, right, for whatever, 1 hour every couple of days, I do my study, or however, whatever the timetable works for you. But always try to keep it fun. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's important. How do you do that? All sorts of ways. Enjoy the tasting, try to find some people to study with or to communicate with online. For me, the whole point about wine is sharing and having fun. And
Mm-hmm.
there is a danger with doing these studies is that it gets a bit too technical, it gets a bit too heavy, a bit too intense. So always just try to have fun, keep it light, find other people you can
Yeah.
work with, study with, and make it work for you.
Well, I agree with all the free content and additional content that's available. It's easy to learn and to really get deep into a certain topic using YouTube, Instagram, etc., etc. And the maps like this, they really add to that. I think. I mean, we can't say that to people leave the books and drop them, because I mean it's part of the course and it's
Yeah.
necessary. But in the end, these courses are, in my experience, always quite compressed as well. Because if you talk
Mm,
about WSET 2, it's only about 6 or 7 lessons,
yeah.
and 3 is about 10. So if you look at what you need to know in a certain period of time, we're talking about 2 months, 3 months maybe. And
Mm,
people, a lot of people are actually, they have a job, or they go to school, so they have other stuff to do. And then when you think about what you need to get into your head in 2, 3 months, it's quite a lot. So in that perspective, getting help with maps, for example, like this, I think it's really a smart thing to learn like this. And well, it's a really a good addition to what's already on the market there.
thank you. Yeah.
Okay, I think we already got some questions in between. I don't see any questions in the question box for now, but for the audience, if you still have questions, you can drop them in there or in the chat, because now I can keep up. If we talk about the next guest, Elisabeth Moot is going to join us from Wijngoed Rappenhof. and the really typical German, nice name, Rappenhof. They're a VDP winery. So for those who don't know, VDP is well, the organization of let's say the top wine producers in Germany. So they do all the certifications. They have the different wine levels. They're the, let's say, the creme de la creme from the German winemaking industry. And Rappenhof is mainly producing Riesling, but we'll talk with her about the Weingut, that's been in the family since the 1600s, I think. So it's hard to find countries where you find wineries on every corner that are, let's say, 400 or 500 years old. But in Germany, that's still quite easy to do. Do you have a nice question for Elisabeth about Riesling, about Rheinhessen, about German wine, maybe? I don't know.
Well, yeah, I do. But it's more about the family run
That's a
and
good
owned
thing.
winery. Yeah, as I understand it, as you said, Niels, Weingut Rappenhof has been around for 4 centuries in the same family, and that is just astonishing.
Yeah.
And I kind of wonder if there's ever sort of what is Elizabeth's relationship to that tradition? If does it ever feel daunting or intimidating or heavy to kind of carry on this tradition, or maybe there's some excitement of using this tradition to be able to move in different directions. So that's my question. What's her relationship to this tradition, to the history, and how does she see that as it goes into the future?
I think it's a very good question. I was wondering the same thing when I was in Germany in the summer visiting. I visited 17, yes. Well, despite Corona, I managed to visit 17 wineries in Germany, but a lot of them also really old family-owned wineries. And I always was surprised because it sounds nice, but it's also difficult to find somebody in the family to have kids to be that like to take over the heritage. And even if you take over the heritage, what can you touch, what can't you touch, because you might want to change some certain things, but on the other hand, you're not going to mess too much with 4 centuries of history in the end. So I think it's a good question. Let's see what she comes up with as an answer. Okay, thank you very much for your time, James.
You're welcome. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure talking to you. For everybody who's intrigued by the wine maps now, I can advise them to go to your website.
Yes, indeed.
It's jamesflewellen.com.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
And they will find that there's the 2 sets of wine maps. And of course, we're very much looking forward to whatever is going to be the next project. But I'm sure that I know you do a good and cool newsletter. So if the people sign up to that as well, they'll probably get the latest news when there is something else brewing.
Yep. Yes,
that's really good.
Yep. Advanced warning, advanced deals. Yes, indeed.
Very good. Okay, so thank you very much for the time. There is no more questions, so let's call it a wrap for now. And everybody, thank you for watching. And well, hope to see you next week on Friday night for another edition of Cellar Talks. Thanks, James.
Thanks, Niels.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.